I guess the first thing that I want to say about pyramids is that they are finding an astounding number of them all over the world. We thought, most people are familiar with the Great Pyramid of Giza, along with its two counterparts, and then I believe there's even another three of them that are very close to the base of the smallest pyramid. So anyway, there's a pyramid complex there, and most people are aware of that, and they think, oh, that's cool. But what most people don't know is that they have been finding pyramids literally everywhere, and we talked a little bit about this last week. They are literally all over China. You can see them everywhere on Google Earth. The Chinese government denies that they're there, even though you can see them on Google Earth. They don't want to, put a lot of attention to them. And they're finding them in South America. They're finding them all across Russia. They're finding them in Africa in several places. Of course, the Middle East, no secret there, around Giza. And even in Antarctica, which really kind of blew me away. So I started thinking about that. It's like, wow, that's really amazing. So why would the ancients have built so many of these pyramids? What is so special about a pyramid that they're literally all over the world and overgrown to a large extent? A lot of them have not been preserved, but they seem to be unearthing them, in astounding numbers, not to mention all the ones that they found under the ocean. It goes on and on and on. I mean, we are literally littered with pyramids. So, and I even threw out the idea, and it was just an idea, that maybe the pyramids may have had something to do with the stars. I'm not saying that for a fact, but it's, there is some sort of energy to them. And of course, one of the questions I got back from somebody was that, well, if the pyramids were indeed, shooting this energy up into the sky and causing the stars, but the Earth is stationary and it's not rotating, then how is it that the sky is rotating? And that is a very fair question. And of course, I was thinking that possibly the energy might have been tracking, following the sun around. Pure speculation, like I said, because I just think about stuff like this completely out of the box. But I'm in no way saying that the pyramids are the cause of the stars. However, it was something that I had considered. And as we go through this presentation, you're going to find out why I considered that, because they are really quite amazing in what they do. So one of the things about pyramids, of course, is they are one of the sacred geometric forms that basically is embedded within all of the 5 platonic solids. You can put this pyramid form in several different orientations: inside of a sphere, inside of a cube, inside of a dodecahedron, icosahedron, etc. In fact, the pyramid is an integral part of a lot of these. But and then of course, when you get all of them together, you get this Metatron's cube, which, there's pyramids in every orientation in this. So you look at this, and the ancients obviously were aware of the pyramids, and so are modern day Masons, Freemasons. We see the Masons will have the pyramids on the dollar bill. And one thing that I found that was very interesting, when I was looking at the dollar bill pyramid, is I found this little thing that you can actually fold a dollar bill into a pyramid, and when you do, on one of the sides, the pyramid on the dollar itself shows up on the pyramid right on the outside in clear display. One of the other things that was very interesting about this, and where did they say this? It is interesting to explain to the class that this will not work with a piece of paper of any other ratio of dimensions, length and width, other than the ratio and dimensions of the American dollar bill, and possibly other currencies as well. And I don't know, I don't have any other currencies to try it with, but it's a ratio. So it doesn't have to be the exact dimension of the dollar bill, but everything is based in ratios. One of the big things that they had in a movie called 2001, A Space Odyssey, was they had the monolith. And of course, the monolith had the dimensions of 1 by 4 by 9, which are the squares of 1, 2, 3. And I believe that you will find those quote unquote monolithic dimensions prevalent in a lot of things, especially when it comes to pyramids. But Anyway, so I mean, it's very clear that the Masons are aware of it. They have pyramid symbology everywhere in their Masonic halls. They have it literally everywhere. I mean, I shouldn't even have to preach to this group about that. They're very, very prevalent. So you start looking into pyramids, and they have some absolutely amazing effect. Now, the Russians, the Soviet Union, when they dissolved back in, I think it was around 90, 91, 92, something like that, I mean, you know, when the Soviet Union basically, when Russia kind of, you know, undid itself, they still had all these scientists that were working in the military industrial complex. But, you know, since there really wasn't a whole lot for them to do at that point, they were pretty much free to direct their energies and their resources into looking into whatever they wanted to. And for whatever reason, several of these Russian physicists started looking at pyramids. So some of the things that they did is they built some small pyramids. And by the way, today they're building really, really big pyramids. But initially they started out building some small pyramids. And some of the things that they found out were really astounding. For example, one of the experiments that they did, and this was based on some old military guy that had figured this out, is that they had a shortage of steel, good steel, that would make razor blades. And they can only get maybe 1 or 2 shaves out of these razor blades that, you know, before they were pretty much kaput and they couldn't be used anymore. So somebody figured out that if they took these razor blades and they put it inside of a very small pyramid, maybe about 8 to 10 inches tall, something like that, with the basic general shape of the Great Pyramid, except of course it didn't have the, you know, the concave, you know, sides to it. And also it was a little bit taller. The angles were a little bit different in these Russian pyramids. But so they would put these razor blades inside of them, and lo and behold, the razor blades would sharpen themselves. They would become sharp and very usable again. And of course, this is an astounding assertion. But this particular experiment has been replicated by dozens of researchers since then. And it's been verified every single time. Absolutely astounding that this happens. Why does this happen? Well, we'll get into that theory a little bit later, because believe it or not, a lot of the Russian scientists actually do have physics explanations for this. But as far as American technology would be concerned, it goes into an area of woo-woo, right? Areas of energy dealing with prana and you know, kundalini, life energy type things, the type of energies that we can see through technologies like Kirlian photography and stuff like that. So anyway, that was one of the first things that they found out. Then they started building these large pyramids, and they started putting all kinds of things inside of them. And another thing that they found out that was very interesting is that when they would put medicines inside of the pyramids, the medicines would work considerably better. The potency of them would be increased dramatically, to the point where they could literally water down the medicine inside of the pyramid itself, and it would be every bit as potent and every bit as effective, even when they watered it down and cut it down to 1/3, 1/2, 1/4, 1/5, and down to a very small amount. And yet the medicine still had this astounding, you know, full strength capacity, seemingly. Another thing they did is they would put you know, food and like wine in there, and that was like part of that Alan Parsons song that you heard. The food would taste dramatically better, and they would, you know, feed the food to hundreds of people, and there was only, you know, something like 2% of the people that really didn't notice any difference of the food and wine having a much greater taste. And of course, those people were the ones that smoked a lot and you know, had habits like, or drank a lot. Those seemed to dull the senses, and they really weren't able to tell the difference. No surprise there, right? So food and wine taste much better when they're stored in a pyramid. They would put water in there, and they would look at the molecular bonding angle as well as the purity of the pyramids. And lo and behold, the water would become very much purified even when it had some levels of toxic impurities in it, the pyramid would absolutely purify that water, and it would as well change the molecular bonding angle in it, to which of course that goes into the memory of water and all that stuff, and that's a little outside of what we're going to cover today, but it's just very interesting to note that. Another thing they would do is they would actually put people inside of them, and they started putting people that had sicknesses such as cancer, and leukemia, and all kinds, a whole slew of diseases. And lo and behold, these people would have dramatic improvements in their health, or complete cures altogether. And again, the mainstream reaction to that particular effect of the pyramids was that, well, it's just kind of like a placebo effect. People believe that they're going to go in there and get better, and so they do, which may or may not be true. But when it's combined with all of this other interesting information about pyramids, you tend to believe that it's not a matter of psychology that's doing this. There's actually a physical effect, and of course that physical effect can be seen and measured as well, and we'll get into that in a minute. So some of the people that they put in there that had mental health problems such as dementia, psychosis, psychopathy, nervous system conditions such as Parkinson's disease, have been very successfully treated with pyramids and people inside of them. Now, all of this is starting to sound really almost too good to be true, right? But the Russians clearly do not think so, because they have invested a lot of money into this research, and they're literally building a pyramid city. In fact, it may be done right now as we speak. I haven't looked into it, but that was something that they were starting just last year, and they were projecting the completion date to be done in about a year. So, and not only that, this research has been going on for nearly 3 decades. It actually started before the disillusionment or the dissolving of the Soviet Union. But when the Soviet Union broke up, that's when they really got into this. So another thing that they did is they would take mice, and they would inject them with lethal doses of carcinogens, okay? And then they would take a control group of mice, and they would have them outside of the pyramid, and then of course the entire body of the mice, the non-control group that went inside the pyramid, would go in there, and a full 94% of the mice injected with the lethal doses of carcinogens survived inside the pyramid, compared to the control group, in which only 4% of the mice survived. So for whatever reason, it was helping the immune systems of the mice to reject the cancer that the carcinogens should have, obviously invoked right away. Very, very, very strange things like this. And there's many, many incidences of this. Another thing that they did is they started building these very, very large pyramids in oil fields. And all they had to do was get these large pyramids in the proximity of the oil field, or put it in the middle. They didn't have to be right over the top of the pumps. And what it did was it improved the yield of the oil being pumped out of the ground, and it also reduced the viscosity of it by 25%, which gave them a much more usable grade of oil to then refine and process. Very interesting things. And as I said before, cancer could be cured along with many other diseases. Another thing they did was they would take agricultural seeds, to plant, wheat, corn, barley, whatever, or just any type of vegetation, and they would put them inside the pyramid for, a day or two, something like that, and then they would go out and plant them. And what they found is that the seeds that they had inside of the pyramid versus the control group of seeds, which were outside, the seeds inside the pyramid had a 400% increase of growth. The plants were much bigger, they were much healthier, as compared to the control group, which, was nowhere near. I mean, they survived, obviously, and they worked, but it was just like, somebody supercharged these plants that were planted from the seeds that were inside of the pyramids. Another thing that they found was that they would build these pyramids in areas of the Soviet Union that had a pretty high amount of earthquake activity, where they would, get into the 4s and 5s and, sometimes even 6s on the Richter scale. And what would happen is the earthquakes would go way down. They wouldn't have any large earthquakes any longer, but what they would be reduced to is very small tremors. And now the amount of tremors increased, but the large, very damaging quakes that were prevalent in those areas virtually disappeared and were replaced by very, very small tremors. Very strange. Oops, were you going to say something, John? Or okay.
No. I'm just listen. I've always been fascinated by pyramids.
Oh, okay, no problem. I thought I heard your mic kick in there. All right. So another thing they found was that in areas that were prone to severe weather, like for example, here in Colorado, we have a significant amount of tornadoes that go through the eastern plains, and that is, just one of the things that we deal with. And so in Russia, obviously, they have very similar situations. And what they would do is they built these pyramids in these tornado alleys, if you will. And what they found is that the tornadoes would approach these areas, and then they would either do one of two things. They would either completely peter out and completely fizzle out and just stop right away, or they would divert their course to hundreds of miles to each direction, going around the area of the pyramid. So again, there's some sort of really strange energetic thing going on there. And all of these things have been verified and replicated over and over and over and over again. So this is, none of this is just, freak chance that this is happening. It's very demonstrable, very repeatable. So then they started looking at things like, well, all right, what happens if maybe there was some sort of a radioactive spill or something like that? And so they would take radioactive material and they would put it, inside of the pyramid. And of course, radioactive material, if you know anything about it, typically it has a half-life of like several thousand years, right, before it's safe to even be around or handle. And what they found is that it would take this radioactive material and within a matter of days would reduce it to safe levels, where this radioactivity was suitable to actually be around, biologics like, people and animals and stuff like that. Absolutely astounding. Another thing that they found out was that for whatever reason, there would be a strong electrical activity generated at the apex of the pyramids. In other words, I talked last week about the 100 volts per meter, in the typical static model that's typical for the plane. And of course, they were fully aware of this, obviously, and they found that these electrical fields would dramatically increase right at the apex, at the top of the apex of the pyramid. Another very, very strange thing is no real explanation for that. And by the way, these pyramids that the Russians built were not metallic in any way. They were built out of fiberglass and wood and things that were basically non-conductive to metal. And some of them were several hundred feet high. That they would really get way up there. So, but yet for whatever reason, at the apex of these pyramids, there would be this very strong electrical charge. There would also be enormous columns of energy that were literally hundreds of miles wide that would be detected around the pyramid. And in fact, I've got a clip here where I show but the Russian Air Force basically was flying around these pyramids, and their radars would go completely nuts because of the fact that the radar would be painting this column of energy that was coming off the top of the pyramid of the energy of the pyramid. And a lot of pilots have also said that, that especially that are flying in the region of Giza, is they say that they are not allowed to fly over the top of those because it makes their instruments go completely nuts in Giza. And of course, there's several places in South America that, this happens as well. So very interesting phenomenon. So, okay. Then another thing they did is they would take pyramids, they would take granite and they would put it inside of a pyramid, and then they would build jail cells, you know, for 5,000 prisoners in Russia, okay? And from this material being built from granite that was inside of a pyramid, and by the way, when you put granite inside of a pyramid, a very interesting thing happens to the crystal structure of the granite. It literally starts developing rings of crystal alignment inside of the granite, which is one interesting, you know, side effect. But anyway, so they would take this and they built prisons, and they would house these prisoners in it, and the prisoners would have a profound improvement of attitude and behavior. There would be a substantial increase in addiction recoveries from alcohol and drugs. In other words, just absolutely miracle stuff. So you don't necessarily even have to be in the pyramid itself, but be around things or consume things that have been in the pyramids for you to get these effects, okay? Another thing, let's see, people inside the pyramids, and a lot of these pyramids are open to visitors in the Soviet Union, and a lot of people report having very profound consciousness changes and spiritual awakenings inside of the pyramids, virtually entirely positive. There are some people that had bad experiences, and they didn't really go into that, but I mean the overwhelming amount of people that were inside or meditating inside of the pyramids would have very, very profound and spiritual type awakenings. So let me show you a couple clips here. Let me bring this up, and let me play this and see what they say.
The Russian Air Force noticed a large energy field that they picked up on their radar, a mile high, going above Golov's large pyramid in Moscow. And therefore, I believe all these effects were caused by these energy fields.
Okay, so basically this is one of Golov's pyramids, and Alexander Golod, G-O-L-O-D, is one of the chief scientists that built a lot of these pyramids. And they, as you can see, these aren't small, they're very, very large pyramids. But yeah, so they're getting reports from the pilots about these energies showing up on their radar. Very, very interesting stuff. And I will definitely put this in the link. And then another thing they would do, and I've talked about this myself. This is very similar to an experiment that I did, as I've told everybody about, when I took a crystal pyramid and had it inside of my freezer and put a shot glass full of water inside the freezer and above the pyramid. And lo and behold, I would leave it in there all night long, and it would not freeze, period, at all. And then when you open the freezer door and you thump that shot glass, it would immediately freeze. So I'm going to show you something very similar to that the Russians achieved, and I just found this today, which was interesting. So let's show you. And what this is this is in Russia. It's very, very cold, below freezing, and he's inside this pyramid, and he's bringing down, and here's a case of water. He's pulling out of water, and as you can see, it's clearly liquid. In fact, he's going to kind of swirl it around a little bit, and you can see that there is definitely liquid in there. And I don't know if I can get this any higher resolution or not. No, that's as high as it goes. But then he thumps it, and see, look what's happening when he thumps it. It goes right down. Here it's going down, and it turns right into an ice cube. Absolutely astounding. You know, what would cause that? It's just really hard to say. So, and of course, like I said, I can verify this because I did this myself, and I was absolutely blown away by this. And that's the only experiment I ever did with a pyramid, but I guarantee you it won't be the last by any means. Then we look at some of the research that has been brought in from Mexico. And this is very interesting because people have been able to actually photograph these beams of light that have been validated as legitimate photographs emanating off of the top of some of these pyramids. This is the one at Chichen Itza in the Yucatan in Mexico. But like I said, they say here the photo was confirmed to be authentic. The UFO researcher Jaime, I can't remember his name, Jaime, whatever he is, this guy here, who is a big, television personality down there that covers UFOs and all this stuff, broke this story several years ago, and I was seeing it, back then, and I was aware of it, but, again, I wasn't nearly as interested then as I am now. But yeah, it's astounding. So people are seeing stuff like this, and photographing these energy beams. They're being picked up on radar. And one other thing that they found also is that the energy on these pyramids is actually emanating also from the corners as well as the top of the pyramid. And they found this out quite by accident. They were having some problems with control groups who were in the vicinity of the pyramid, but not in the pyramid, but were in alignment with the corners of the pyramids that were having some of the very same pyramidal effects from the pyramid, which is very interesting. And of course, just to show you once again that the Masons are fully aware of this, we have something here in America in Las Vegas called the Luxor, which is a hotel and casino, and they of course have this light that, if it's artificial, of course, but it's something like several 100 million candle power that they fire straight up. And this is just meant to be a tourist attraction, but I think they're really telling us something else, that they know full well of these beam emanations that are coming from the top of these pyramids. So very interesting stuff, needless to say. And so anyway, getting back to what the Russians are doing, they are actually now in the process of building a small town, I guess, or small town. It's not really that small. It's what they did is they bought 600 square hectares of land, okay, and they are building these large pyramids all over it, and they're making an entire community out of it. And this is something that I think that they're going to be probably populating this year, because it should be done right about now. And again, I will put these links in there. But this is one of the guys right here that is one of the chief engineers of it, Valery Uvarov. And in this interview, he talks about the design of it, how it's being carried out. In his own words, he says the energy effects are absolutely unbelievable, which they are. I mean, they're very astounding energy effects. And apparently the larger the pyramid, the more profound these effects actually are. So again, like I said, this is not something that's woo-woo. This is absolutely solid science. The Russians are light years ahead of the Americans in this. And in fact, the Americans, as always, are typically, oh, well, if it doesn't fit our science paradigm, then it's all bullshit, right? So, yeah, okay, and I noticed, Jaron, you put a couple of pictures in here in the chat. So let's go ahead and look at those really quick, and then I'll continue on. So this one, oh, wait a minute. What is this one supposed to be showing, Jaron?
Oh, just a picture I found that has the flat Earth map behind Nixon and NASA. The one I put up, the bottom one was the pyramid one. I don't know if you've seen that pyramid in North Dakota that they have. Oh,
no, I was not. I had heard something about that, but I had forgotten about that. But
it's like an old ICBM site, I think.
Uh-huh.
But it's still there.
Yeah, but it's truncated, and that of course is part of the problem. Is when you truncate them, it diminishes their capacity quite a bit. And as I mentioned last week about static electricity wanting to collect around very sharp surfaces, when you truncate them, it greatly diminishes the effect. And of course, on the dollar bill, we see the truncated pyramid with the capstone separated and above it. So at some point, the elites are trying to tell us, I think, that capstone, or at least metaphorically, is going to be coming down and causing some very dramatic effects to the pyramid itself. So anyway, but yeah, that's very, very interesting. So the question then becomes, how do pyramids achieve these powers? I mean, what is it about a pyramid that gives this type of energy harnessing capabilities. And the Russians, of course, have some very interesting information, and it gets fairly technical. But from what I've been able to extrapolate out of it, that the pyramids, for whatever reason, act on specific types of energies, which they're calling prana or chi or kundalini type energies. In other words, life force energies, has this effect of being able to kind of focus them. Very similar to what a parabola will do for either audio or RF or light propagation. Of course, if you take a parabola and you listen to audio sounds, in the 20 to 20,000 hertz range. And thank you, Nathan, by the way, for correcting me on that. It is 20 to 20,000, not 30 to 30,000, but 20 to 20,000 hertz in the audio spectrum. And it will focus that sound in a particular direction. So the parabola design does that. Also in RF, we see parabolas all over the place, in your little dish network or dish, or a lot of the like ham radio antennas that are using supposed EME bounce, and we'll touch on that a little bit later also. What the idea behind the parabola is to simply focus electromagnetic, audio, or even light into a specific direction. Of course, a headlight is a really good example of a light parabola where you will have a center element that's lit, and then you'll have like a parabola of silvered metal around it, which focuses the beam out and forward. So it's very similar, except it's not necessarily just electromagnetic or audio or light energy that the pyramid does this to. And obviously the design is quite different from a parabola, but it is along those lines of what it is doing in being able to focus this life energy. Now, one of the things that's really interesting also that they have found about the pyramids is they have had a technology around for many, many years called Carillion photography. And what Carillion photography does is it basically is a type of photography that can allow you to see bioluminescence, well, not just bioluminescence, but life force energy, okay?
Like your aura.
Like your aura, exactly. Yeah. And it's very interesting in the way that it works, and I won't go into that today, but it's very interesting the way that it works. But they are literally able to photograph these different spectrums of light around living organisms, not just people, but plants very much. You can do this on. And one of the other things, I'll just throw this in as a side note, that they found is that there is something called the phantom limb effect, which not only works with people, but it also works with plants. And a lot of people will say that, they lost their arm or had to be amputated for whatever reason, and yet they swear sometimes that arm is still there. Well, that could be some sort of a weird mental condition or whatever. But when they take Carillion photography and they look at the life energy of a leaf, and then they will tear part of that leaf away, well, the life energy pattern that they're registering on the Carillion photography stays exactly the same as if the leaf was intact. Another thing along those lines that's very interesting is that they can take a leaf, separate it from a tree, and watch the life force under Carillion photography, watch it dissipate and kind of fade away. They can then take that very same leaf, put it inside of a small pyramid, and I'm talking, maybe a foot tall. They can put it inside of a small pyramid and for about an hour, and then put it back under the Carillion photography in the camera, and lo and behold, the life force increases by an order of magnitude. I mean, so again, what is going on with these pyramids? And the reason, a lot of people may be asking, well, Bob, that's all cool and stuff, but what does this have to do with the flat Earth? And honestly, I'm not sure at this point, but my instinct tells me that, when I look at the Earth and I see it as an electrical circuit, and I see all this static charge in the air, and I've already described the cathode and the anode. There are several types of energy that are going on around us, and I cannot help but think but that the pyramids, especially with the sheer numbers of them and the interests of the Masons, that there's got to be some role that these pyramids are playing. And whether or not it has anything to do with, lighting up the stars, in the same way that firing a laser at the sodium layer would do, I don't know. It's a thought, but it's a mystery, and I love mysteries, and I think we all love mysteries, especially the mysteries that the mainstream science community would poo-poo on and say, oh, well, that's just absolutely patently ridiculous. Well, it's now at the point where, those notions are completely outdated. In fact, one of the things that I'm going to make available to everybody after the show closes, I'm going to go ahead and make a Google Drive, is I have nearly 1,000 pages of information, one being the complete pyramid source book, which alone is 513 pages, that is kind of the Bible of pyramids and pyramid energy. I'm going to make this available to everybody. I also have a couple other documents that are interesting. Now, what I haven't been able to find yet is this particular document, which is called Pyramid Power by Dr. G. Patrick Flanagan. I got it off Kindle. It was only $4, and then I actually bought the hard copies too. There's 2 editions of it, and I also bought the hard copy of the complete pyramid source book. But anyway, these are really good areas to start looking into pyramids. And like I said, the Russian scientists are giving very detailed and technical explanations as to what is going on with these pyramids. And what the things that I've covered today are just the tip of the pyramid, so to speak, as to what's actually going on with these. And I am by no means through any of all of this information yet that even I had, because I just started really looking into it in depth this week. But I'm going to make this available to everybody. But I would recommend that you start out with this particular document by Patrick Flanagan called Pyramid Power, available through Amazon on Kindle. Don't forget to go to Jaronism's site first and click his little link so he gets a couple bucks off of it too. And buy this and read it. This is something that I'm going to be asking not only the researchers, in our research group, to be looking into, but everybody in the community. And I think that this is compelling enough that it's going to make probably everybody out in the chat and anybody that watches this video want to look into it more, because what it's claiming are literally results that are nothing short of miraculous in energy development. Oh, this is another thing, and I found this off of another YouTube's video. Video. And where was that? Anyway, it's a document. I'll pull it up here in a bit, that shows how they are using pyramids to be electrostatic generators and actually converting it into like RF power where they can harness it and stuff like that. So, and I can't figure out what the heck I did with that, but I'll find it and make that available as well. So, oh, here it is. I just found it. Here we go. So this document here, and you may have seen it on another YouTuber's channel, but the pyramidal electric transducer, DC to RF converter for the capture of atmospheric and electrostatic energy. This is a very high-level engineering document. However, it needs to be, and as the other YouTuber said, and this is just something else to look in, and I will put that link in the chat as well.
Yeah, it's really, really awesome. And not to interrupt, but if you look at the etymology of pyramid, it means fire inside. And so whoever named it, or however we came up with that name in the English, and that's what they're sort of called in all languages, pyramid or fire inside. That they must have known that there was something special about the the interior of the pyramid. And also looking at Nikola Tesla, if I'm not mistaken, he borrowed the the pyramid idea to harness the electrostatic energy out of the air. He went and looked back at the construction of the pyramids and what was going on with them, and he must have understood something that we're just sort of scratching the surface on. I see the pyramids because, like you mentioned, they're all over the world. It's not like they're just in Egypt. they're everywhere. So, you know, how can we maintain the common, you know, historical narrative that, you know, Egypt was just this one-off thing, or, you know, the Mayas were just this one-off thing? To me, it's evidence of a worldwide civilization that either had some way to communicate with one another or something. But you know, our modern history teaches us that, you know, everything's been separate. You know, Columbus discovered America and all of this, but you know, you see these consistencies between the South American pyramids and the Egyptian pyramids that are just staggering. So not to interrupt you, but I just thought it was interesting that you know, other people are looking into this. Christopher Dunn is another brilliant, I think, engineer that's sort of dedicated his life into looking at the Giza pyramids, and has found all sorts of really, really interesting evidence that they were using the pyramids to naturally, not just for its sort of, I guess you could say, inherent qualities that you've been describing, just the simple shape of it, but they were actually utilizing them as in some sort of a machine capacity. To what end, who knows? But it's almost as if there was chemical reactions going on, piezoelectric effect going on from the limestone underneath, with the water being, the basins underneath the pyramids being filled and diminished of water. So just all kinds of really interesting stuff that you could go on for days with. But go on ahead. I just wanted to burst in there real quick while it was on the top.
Oh, no problem. And actually, those are very, very good points. And yes, and I suspect very much that Tesla was aware of this pyramidal energy as well. In fact, if you look at Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower, right, what does it look like? It looks like a large pyramid structure, except it's got that big ball, that big geodesic ball on the top of it, that he was going to be transmitting energy, you know, through the earth across the world, and be able to supply energy to, you know, any place that he wanted to. So super, super interesting stuff, you know, that we're seeing. So I suspect that Tesla was fully aware of this, and was probably had a lot of this stuff incorporated into his own design. So yeah, amazing stuff. So yeah, that's pretty much, you know, just kind of touching on the highlights. And of course, I'm not prepared to go a whole lot further, you know, in a lot of the stuff I've did, because I've just started barely putting a dent in a lot of the research material that I've gotten. I went crazy and ordered a crap ton of books on the subject, and I'm a very, you know, avid reader, love to read stuff like this, and as soon as I find out even more interesting stuff, I will be getting back to the community with specific experiments they can try, even though these books outline many of them that can be tried by people, you know, just anybody. And one of the first things I'm going to do personally is I'm going to set up a pyramid like above, you know, my office chair, for example, places that I spend a lot of time in. Some people have pyramids that they set up over their bed, and they report phenomenal effects from these pyramids that they do, or, you know, wherever. And they're very simple to make, because from what I'm able to gather, and I have found some conflicting information on this, apparently it doesn't really matter what you make the pyramids out of, even though the Russians avoided metallic construction materials altogether. But there are several people that have built them out of like copper and stuff like that, that apparently they're getting tremendous effects from. So, you know, I'll let the, you know, anybody that's doing these experiments use your own discernment on how you want to do that. Of course, research it first before you start, you know, building any of these things. But
well, listen to this is something that I do remember from Christopher Dunn's work, and let me know what you think, Bob, from an electrical engineering standpoint. But the three Great Pyramids at Giza, supposedly they were all three different colors. So one of them was like red, blue, and black, or something like that. They all three resonate at different harmonic frequencies. I think the Great Pyramid is like F sharp, I believe, but they all have different sort of harmonic resonant frequencies. But the weirdest thing is that the colored exterior stones that they use in the construction, well, that's all gone now. All we are left with is what was like inside of this encasing that was black, blue, or red, or whatever. Now, from what Christopher Dunn found is that this specific type of stones that were used for the exterior had insulative qualities, while the stones that we see now are better conductive. And so at the top, you've got allegedly solid gold capstone, which to me, if you're thinking about the I guess you would say the electric potential between the top of the Great Pyramid and the bottom, and all of the I guess the electrostatic charge or the differentials between the ground and the top, it seems to me like they were, it wasn't just some off chance that they built these things, where they did and how they did. I mean, to me, it's like they had some grandiose purpose, whether it was generating energy or whether it was healing purposes or a combination thereof. But it's almost as if they were spreading that pyramid power out further by, attuning the three to these different harmonic frequencies. I mean, it could have been, when the Great Pyramids were operational, assuming that they did have an operational time period, and now they're sort of, falling apart, if you will. But could you just imagine like how awesome and powerful those things would be when they were operational? Like if Christopher Dunn's right, like if you read his work and like if he's right, which it really, I agree with him. It's just amazing what kind of technologies that ancient civilizations must have had.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's a book out there called I believe it's called Giza Power Plant, and I can't remember the author of it.
It's Christopher Dunn. Yep.
Oh, that was Christopher. I'm sorry.
Yep.
Okay. All right. I guess I spaced on that. But anyway, so yeah, that's exactly what they're talking about. They're looking at these things as, they were very likely power sources, amongst all the other amazing things that they did. But, just like that document I was showing before, they're actually using the pyramid technology to collect, to be in use as electrostatic and energy collectors. Aaron Dover had some interesting hypotheses on, how it was done, and I don't know if any of this is true, and I have to check it myself. But according to his assertions, he's saying something to the effect that the Great Pyramid was once right on the bank of the Nile. Okay.
Yep.
And that may be true. I don't know. And so he was kind of running this hypothesis that they channeled the water through the pyramid to act as a cooling device. Now, for whatever reason, I can't really buy that, because I don't see something like as a passive energy gatherer developing heat, because heat is usually generated as a product of work being done, so to speak. And this seems to be like a natural harvesting of energy through the atmosphere. So I don't know if I agree with that, but it was interesting to hear, a different take on it. But
if you look at what Christopher Dunn was saying, is that they found, and I don't want to misquote him, but they found specific types of sediment on the walls of the different chambers, and these were sort of signatures of a chemical reaction that would signatures of a specific chemical reaction that could be used to produce energy. Now, as far as like the water, the evidence that I remember that compelled me to believe that the pyramid used to be very close, much closer to the Nile than it is now, is they actually had sort of like a jetty or a pier going off into where the water used to be. So, you wouldn't build a pier off into no water, right? So that's sort of good evidence for that. But then you have this whole issue, according to geologists, it would have taken something like 50,000 years for the Nile to have migrated as far as it has. But then again, what the hell do geologists know? But yeah, just so many crazy things about it. And it's like, we're taught that in our modern age that we're the pinnacle of civilization. We've got the highest technologies ever, yet we can't figure out how all of these ancient civilizations built these massive pyramids all over the world. And so to me, it's just evidence of, there was this worldwide civilization that was in communication, and at some point there must have been either a worldwide catastrophe, maybe it was a flood, maybe it was something else, but it's as if nobody really remembers where we came from, and it's almost as if the people who did keep records and did remember where we came from, the Roman Catholics or Rome before it became the Roman Catholic Church, killed them and destroyed their history, right? And that goes right up to the Mayas.
Yep, absolutely.
Not only
Yep.
that, you've got these brotherhoods like the Freemasons sort of owning the symbology. So, you know, people see the pyramid symbol now as this evil thing to stay away from, right? Because it's a Freemason Illuminati thing. But, you know, they can't own a symbol. And I think that, you know, symbols don't have any power in their own per se. It's what we collectively believe is what gives the symbols their power. Does that make sense? Like, it's almost as if the...
A little bit, but you have like sigils and you have uh, archetypes, right? And those particular type of symbols, if you will, I believe have a very profound effect psychologically. And in fact, there's several studies done on sigils specifically that show that people do have very strong reactions to certain shapes. So I don't know if I would totally agree, John, that the symbol itself doesn't have any power, because, you know, the evidence would kind of indicate otherwise.
Well, maybe I said that wrong. I guess what I'm trying to say is that we shouldn't allow the, you know, let's just say the Illuminati or the Freemasons, we shouldn't allow them to own that symbol, and we shouldn't think of it as an evil thing, because obviously there's some really profound positive benefits to the, you know, to the pyramid itself, which is symbolized by very easily with a triangle, right? But I
Right.
think that, you know, we shouldn't be afraid of things that we don't understand. We shouldn't be, you know, and we shouldn't, I guess what I'm really trying to say is we shouldn't allow, you know, certain groups of people to own symbols and be afraid of those symbols, if that makes better sense, I think.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely true. And a lot of people are afraid of symbols, or you know, they'll see 666 and they go, oh my God, it's the devil, you know, which is absurd, because
oh God, I was 33 for a whole year. Can you believe that?
right? I know. But I mean, what's interesting, if you actually study the number 666, it's kind of an amazing number. And I won't go into that. That's kind of the subject for another show. But yes, I realize that the Bible refers to it as, you know, the number of the beast, or, you know, makes all these negative connotations to it. But the number itself is very, very interesting. In a plethora of ways, and I spent, I think, a whole couple days just looking into the number 666, because it's so fascinating, both mathematically and symbolically. But yet people see that and they completely freak. Just like a lot of people would go, and a lot of hotels had to have the 13th floor. They wouldn't label any floor 13. It would go like 12 to 14, because people would freak out if they, you know, got a room on the 13th floor. So, you know, just weird stuff like that. And those are the kind of things that are embedded into our consciousness, whether it be done religiously or whatever. Kind of like, I think the Bible makes kind of references in some way to things like Ouija boards, and how they should be avoided because dark spirits can be brought in with that. And of course, that's an interesting concept, and maybe even be true to some degree. But I think that what really has more of the effect on, you know, when you're using a Ouija board, would have to do with your own state of mind and your own vibration. But again, we're digressing here off of that. But you're absolutely right about how some people are absolutely afraid of these things, and, you know, for no real reason. Most people are afraid of things they don't understand, and they are dissuaded from even looking into it, because, you know, they're convinced that it's some very dark thing, and, you know, you got to stay away from it at all costs. And of course, you know, to me, that's just ignorance. But, you know, what do you do?
Yeah.
To each their own. So anyway, a lot of this work was pioneered by a guy named Dr. Patrick Flanagan. And Patrick Flanagan is no dummy. He holds a PhD, an SCD, which is basically another type of doctorate in science, and a master's. So basically 2 doctorates and a master's, you know, in these type of fields, electrical engineering and whatnot. So, I mean, he's very highly educated. He has some very amazing inventions. One of the things that he designed was this thing called a neurophone. And neurophones were very interesting, because all it was basically was a device that you would take the audio output of like a speaker system. Okay, so you take one channel off your stereo, and take that audio output, put it through a transformer that is called a step-up transformer. In other words, it has like 100 windings on the primary and then like 2,000 windings on the secondary, which what that will do is that steps up the voltage of the signal coming out of that stereo, right? And then he would put it into this kind of coiled wild wire cluster that would go around in the ear vicinity. And what was amazing about it is it didn't make any sounds, you know, perceivably that anybody could hear. However, the people that were outfitted with this device could hear loud and clear HD sound being beamed directly into their head from this simple device. And it's patented and it's for real, right? So, I mean, this guy he's no dummy. And it's just interesting. That's, you know, part of his background that he you know, design this. You know, he says which device to transmit signal directly to the brain, and obviously, even modern day technology, they're looking at stuff like that. One of the technical articles that I read a while back was that Sony was looking at this technology for their next generation of PlayStations, not only for being able to transmit signals into the brain, but to be able to read the electrical impulses and interpret them for gameplay. Now, that's cool, but it's also kind of scary, right?
Yeah, really, I don't want my video game playing me. What the crap?
Right. But yet Sony is looking at that. So, you know, be looking for that on, you know, maybe the PlayStation 6 or whatever is going to have something like that. I don't know. And honestly, already there is that technology available, the neural interface for that is available by aftermarket companies that does work on PlayStation. So, I mean, it's here today. But obviously Sony feels like
I'm sorry to interrupt, but it makes you wonder, you know, if this guy invented in what, 1973, why haven't we seen, you know, all sorts of technology stemming from this? And I would submit that it's because it really hits too close to home in terms of going down the path of free energy, right? So if
yes,
his sort of work was, you know, obviously it's patented, but if it was really widespread for the last 30 years, I think that it would have led plenty of people towards understanding what we're sort of stumbling upon the last, you know, few months, I guess you could say, in terms of what is energy, you know, how is lightning formed, for example, which science doesn't have an explanation for in the globe Earth model. But if you consider, you know, the electric universe model, where the Earth is essentially a capacitor plate, or there's an electrostatic charge to the Earth, then all this stuff makes a whole lot of sense, and it makes sense to why they, in quotes, they would want to cover it up. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not. It certainly hasn't. This is the first I've ever heard of it. I thought that was a relatively new technology where they, you know, beam advertisements into your brain when you're walking by the billboard.
Oh yeah. Well, you know, I don't put anything past them these days. And of course, you know, what's in the consumer market, I think is quite a bit behind what, you know, the government and the powers that be actually have. So. And in some things, I believe that they do have technology that's quite a bit advanced, and in other things, I think it's just straight up bullshit. That they're using it, you know, the idea that they have these technologies as kind of a fear-mongering type of tool. You know, but like UFOs, I think all the UFO sightings that people see, including the two that we've seen sitting out in our hot tub in the backyard, which blew us away, are absolutely, you know, man-made technologies. And I think a lot of the reason that they keep this stuff secret, of course, is going back to Dr. Carol Rosin's story about what Werner von Braun told her. But anyway, I digress again. So anyway, as far as the pyramids, you know, people can buy it or they cannot buy it. You know, it's up to you. But what I am saying is that there is a bunch of information, I mean a lot of information on this pyramid phenomenon. The Russians are not jacking around with it. They are taking it very seriously. They are developing it. And the great thing about this pyramid technology is it's something that is very easily tested in our own homes. Anybody can make small pyramids out of balsa wood sticks and, you know, small material. And from what I understand, you don't even necessarily have to have a covering on the framework of the pyramid itself, because it's simply the framework itself that is causing this effect. So you don't necessarily have to have a covering on the outside. And of course, they will go into detail about, you know, when that is more appropriate and when it isn't. But it's something that's the cool part about it. Just like I did with my little freezer experiment, anybody can do that, and you know, blow yourself away. By all means, do it, or build yourself a small pyramid, put it over your favorite chair, or put it over your bed, and see if these people aren't full of crap or not, or if, you know, or if this actually has something to it. I personally am really looking forward to, you know, putting a pyramid over my favorite chair and possibly even over our bed, you know, to see if it maybe alleviates some of my symptoms like lower back pain and stuff like that I have. But, you know, I'm certainly not going to dismiss it, especially with the mountains of evidence that very, very, very credible and qualified people, you know, not just, you know, your average Joes, but these are PhD scientists that are very serious about the study of this. And like I said, they wouldn't be wasting money building an entire city out of pyramids if they thought that this was some sort of a joke. And beyond that, like I said, why did the ancients, why were they so obsessed with them? Why were they all over the world? You know, you can think they're bullshit. That's great. That's just your own ignorance. If you don't want to investigate it, then don't. But me personally, I'm going after it.
Don't say ignorance yet. No, I'm just kidding. Because I've always had a problem with pyramids, and not saying that they don't work. I think anything could work in that fashion. I mean, obviously we're proving by our rice experiment here that just by our intentions that we can change the makeup of rice. But with the pyramids, Bob, haven't they been discovering over the last 5-10 years that the stone is all a composite, basically a limestone like concrete that was, I mean, I thought that's the going.
Yeah, that's, well, yes, the limestone on the Great Pyramid, yes, they're constructed out of limestone, and they had a casing stone, which was a highly polished white type of limestone as well. And of course, that's largely been, I think they peeled it off for some other project that they were doing.
Yep. They sure did. And it was two different they used two different types of stone for the exterior, you know, one type for the exterior, one type for the interior, which is what we now see as the face of the pyramids. But the interesting thing was they specifically chose a type of stone for the exterior that was more insulative, electrically speaking, and the interior was more conductive. It's just fascinating. You know, it just really makes you wonder what were they doing with them. And I bet you after this show, there's going to be 500 people that go and buy a pyramid and see if it makes their weed better. Where it's legal, of course.
And what I'm talking about, though, is when people say, oh, today we couldn't build one, which I've always thought that was a joke. And even now that we're finding out that it's a concrete, so it was poured, it was liquid. So it wasn't difficult to build them. It wasn't something really ancient. You know, they may have had an ancient secret as far as what the pyramids themselves did. That I don't know. But what I do know is that it's easily explainable now that they had casts. They had a cast that you would pour liquid in and then remove the cast the next day and you have your block done. So nobody carried any heavy blocks anywhere or did anything like that. Isn't that the known thing now?
Well,
I was under the impression that it was cut stones. But
no, I think they thought it was, but the most recent thing is when they did a test on the bricks, the blocks were made from a limestone conglomerate, like a concrete. It was liquid that was poured into casts and then created the stones. And so I've always thought that they pushed the idea of pyramids. I mean, at least when I was growing up or when I was in my 20s or whatever, they talked about them as being, oh, we couldn't even build them today. And I always thought that was a joke. Like, yeah, right. I mean, we build buildings that are the World Trade Center towers. How in the hell would we not be able to build a pyramid? It's like, I think that they used the pyramids to push the idea of an ancient civilization, to push the idea of these people were smarter than you, to push the idea that I don't believe that they're constructed in the shape of the earth, or they say that the dimensions match the dimensions of the earth. And they say that, that they're measured, they're so perfect. They're like, you take the dimensions around it and it equals pi or something. I mean, I remember reading a bunch of stuff, but then looking into it and you find different measurements everywhere. Like there's not even a agreed upon exact dimensions. So, I mean, to me, it's just, I'm not saying that pyramids themselves don't have powers, because I think that they do actually. And the fact that they're built all over the world tells me that they do. But the idea of them always pushing that we couldn't build one, I never understood. We have cranes that lift many times more weight than the weight that they had in those blocks. So if we have cranes that can lift blocks, then we can easily build them today. So maybe I misunderstood what they were always trying to say.
Well, I think the biggest thing about that, Jaron, is that the pyramid was made up of something like 2 million of these outrageously heavy stones. And yeah, I'm sure that we probably do have the technology at some point to lift these, but that's only come about very recently in the latter part of the 20th century, right? You know, when we got these type of cranes and when they started doing these renovations to Stonehenge, right? And you covered that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, but one thing that they haven't been able to figure out is apparently the adhesive that this type of cement they have not been able to replicate, or whatever it is, the adhesive that bonded the outside casing stones to the internal blocks is something that they haven't been able to replicate. You know, and I got that from just reading this, you know, so far. So again, I don't have all the answers, but you know, yeah, I'm sure that we do in some ways have this technology, but the bottom line is, as the Russians have demonstrated,
right,
it doesn't necessarily have to be perfect phi and pi proportions like the Great Pyramid is. In fact, the angle of the Russian pyramids is much steeper. It's like a 72-degree angle where they are getting the optimal results. And I don't normally go here, but I will say that one body of evidence that I read years ago called the raw material, that was channeled material, said something to the effect of because of the energetic field of the earth changing, that the Great Pyramid is now kind of like a piano that's out of tune. Okay, and maybe that's why the angle of the Russian pyramids is so much sharper, right? Because
then,
you know,
oh,
go ahead.
The only other question I had on them was, I guess I've never understood when they say they're lined up with the stars. Explain that to me, because I guess I don't get how a pyramid, of course, would be lined up to whatever you said. I mean, it's a pyramid.
No, when they're talking about the stars, are you talking about the Orion alignment, the Great Pyramid and
just
Orion?
That they say they're astronomically aligned.
Well,
but to me, just, you know, what stars move throughout the sky throughout the night. So you're just telling me that they basically, you could look through a shaft and see a certain star, but if the stars move?
Right.
So,
obviously, it has to do with a specific time period and date, you know, that these things were aligned to. Now, one thing I did see when I was reading through this material is that one of the very important things that dramatically changed the effectiveness of the pyramid was that the pyramid had to be aligned perfectly north-south. And if it wasn't, if it was off, you know, by a few degrees, the pyramid would still work, but the energy readings that they were getting out of it were largely attenuated. So,
which is interesting, because I don't think the Great Pyramids are those three are not anymore, right?
No, it's almost perfectly. Actually, I think we still you can calibrate your compass to due north with the Great Pyramid. That's how
it's still really close.
Yeah.
But one of the other things about it, and of course, and this is just another thought, I'm going to throw this out there because I've been thinking a lot about it also. But you know how in Genesis, you know, the Bible talks about, you know, when the stars and the wandering lights in the sky were made, the planets, or as we call them now, that the specific purpose of them was for signs, and you know, for specific signs of things to come. Well, I think that the stars, of course, are all part of this energetic construct of the plane itself. And one thing that they tell us, and at this point I'm not really doubting it anymore, but they're saying that the magnetic poles are actually drifting sometime at the rate of 17 feet per year, and some years is a little faster and a little slower, which of course would correspond to possibly, you know, how the planets go around in different orbits, and there's different alignments with the planets. So I'm thinking that these two things are intimately related, and it's entirely possible that you know, the Masons are fully aware of these alignments and what is happening. And so when we see these specific alignments in the sky, and we are also seeing field changes, energetic changes in the Earth, that these are the very things that are part of the makeup of this circuit of the plane, and that certain energy alignments are predictable. In fact, they found that a lot of the major earthquakes occur during specific planetary alignments. Okay.
Yeah, there's a guy who's got a channel that does live earthquake watch and predicting, and can even predict them because of the alignments of the planets.
Yep.
Yep. So, you know, there's a lot that we don't know. And I mean, that's one of the first things that I think, you know, a lot of people that go into researching a lot of this stuff is, you know, the more you study, the more you realize you really don't know. You don't have a clue. I mean, here I am, 56 years old today, and I thought I knew everything, you know, a few decades ago. And today I will freely admit, I don't know jack, right? I don't know anything compared to, you know, what anybody my age theoretically should. And all I find out is that there's so much that I don't know. I'm really humbled by it. Largely because, you know, our education system sucks, and it's an indoctrination system. They're really not teaching us anything but lies. And so the more I see beyond those lies and start doing my own studies and my own research, the more I realize that, you know, there's so much that I don't know. And anybody that tries to make analysis of, you know, like phenomena like pyramids or the flat earth, and you try and put these ideas into conventional mainstream science, it's not going to work. Just like, you know, the people that talk about, oh, the southern rotating stars. Well, you cannot use that mainstream scientific paradigm in looking at the flat earth, because again, the stars are not what we think they are. They are not suns thousands of light years away. They are some sort of local phenomenon. And then when you start looking at that, and if you can get yourself to admit that, and hopefully we can prove that at some point with the balloon, even though it's already been proven that they're not going to be visible, then people are going to have to take a step back from what they think they know and start considering, open their mind and consider some other possibilities. I mean, you know, I talk about this stuff, and a lot of people, you know, like to come and listen to the things that we talk about here, but again, we are not experts by any means. We are simply exploring these possibilities. Granted, a lot of the stuff we look at has a decent amount of evidence to back them up, and that's why we're looking at them in the first place. You know, just like I said, if it wasn't for the fact that there are thousands, if not tens of thousands, of pyramids all over the world, and the fact that all this astounding research has been done on it, I probably wouldn't give it a second thought. But you know,
and I think the best thing is too to just be able to hear someone do a presentation like you just did, because I was able to ask my few questions about them, and it's something that I haven't done enough research on. And you know, what you found or shown will cause me to go look into it, because obviously there's something there. You know, no one would say that there's nothing at all there. You know, we should put it away. Obviously not.
Yeah, that's it. And that's what we have. We kind of have to approach this with a degree of being humble, and realize and admitting that we don't know. There's so many things that we don't know, and you know that the mainstream people, the powers that should not be, are never going to tell us, because part of their whole game is hoarding this knowledge that would ultimately benefit mankind. So therefore, you know, and I've always taken this approach, and it may be a foolish approach, but whatever. But if the mainstream tells me that something is bad for me or you shouldn't do something, then honestly, my thought is, well, then maybe I need to look into it and and do it anyway, because I know that they're not ever going to tell us anything that are going to benefit us. So because they turn everything around on us, well, my whole philosophy is, well, then just turn it right back around. Mainstream science says, oh, pyramids are bullshit. It's all, you know, even in some of these interviews that you hear, you'll hear doctors, you know, mainstream trained people will say stupid shit like, oh, it's just placebo effect, or, you know, there's nothing to this, or it's just a wild, you know, coincidence or whatever. I don't believe that. And I think that when they go there and they start making these assertions, and it is the mainstream paradigm, then there's something wrong. And chances are 9 times out of 10, at least, the opposite is going to be true. And that's honestly how I operate.
Yeah, I think it's the best way to do it too, because we've given way to believing whatever a scientist says, and we let people even speak outside of their area of expertise. Like, why would a climatologist know anything about pyramids, or why would, you know, yeah, we let these people whatever they say is that must be the truth. So no, you're absolutely right. I mean, if Flat Earth has taught us one thing, it's that they'll go around and teach you something is the dumbest belief in the world, and it'll end up being true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine how gullible people had to be to believe, and even to this day, believe that what we pump into our gas tanks, petroleum, comes from fossils, dead dinosaurs from millions of years ago, and that's what people actually believe. And yet, there's good evidence that the wells that we thought were tapped are slowly being refilled. So how do you explain that? But yeah, I mean,
you could refine anything and make it a fuel. You could refine corn cobs and turn that into fuel. If the entire industry, automotive industry, built cars that would run off of that particular gas instead of the ones we have. So yeah, you're totally right.
Well, and the reason, right, and the reason something like that will never ever happen as long as America is what it is, because our dollar is tied to petroleum. It's that's what it's valued in, other than our faith. It's the petrodollar. And so if you were to totally remove petroleum from the equation at this point, the U.S. economy would go to shit. But I mean, it's going to happen eventually anyway. It's a fiat currency, but hey,
yep,
just crazy.
So yeah, that's obviously the way the world works, and I think many of us here are aware of that. And the people that find this to be utter nonsense, I would say, are probably very much still caught up in the mainstream indoctrination system, and they simply will not allow themselves to believe, it's not even that you have to believe something else, but it is imperative that you keep an open mind to things, because the second you close down your mind and say, oh horseshit, this is not possible, you're really doing yourself a disservice. And I'm not saying be gullible and believe everything, but there's kind of a fine line that needs to be balanced there.
We have to recognize that fact too. I think that's the hardest thing, is knowing that what the human tendency is, which is always to reject that which you don't know anything about. So when I first heard about 9/11, I rejected it, told my friend he was an idiot, to go away, and then I looked it up on my own, and the whole thing is you can't teach truth, you have to something has to be realized. And understanding that, because then when I heard no planes, I'm like, bullshit, what are these people talking about, no planes? Then you look into it, and then you kind of get it, my wife telling me flat earth, no, you're an idiot, planes can't go around. And then, but at this point now, at least I have the humility to hear anything and just not immediately discount it, at least remind myself that, okay, you're gonna deny this because it's something differently than you currently believe, but give it a chance.
Yeah. Very much so, and that's the way you have to operate. And again, it starts with eating a little bit of humble pie and admitting to yourself. You don't have to admit it to anybody else, but as long as you admit it to yourself that you don't know everything, and that there is a possibility that there are other ways. And because typically the mainstream beliefs are the ones that are the most wrong, in my experience. So for me personally, it's pretty easy to discard the mainstream paradigm as a matter of routine practice. But that's just something that I picked up after researching conspiracies and stuff like this for over 2 decades. You start coming to the conclusion that there is nothing that the elites will not do to enslave us and keep this knowledge away from us. So
including, I think that one thing that they do is they create 2 different possibilities and then make people argue over the 2 choices, for instance, and then people decide, well, I'm going to be friends with this person, or I'm going to follow this person on YouTube or whatever, based on their opinion of one thing, which is crazy. There's people who say, oh, well, this person believes in the Holocaust and this person believes it's a hoax. And so now you've got two groups of people against each other when the truth is obviously in the middle. And that's, I think, the hardest thing, is people will just say, even if I just said that the truth's in the middle, there'll be a group of people that will say, oh, Jaron believes in the Holocaust, therefore we can't watch him anymore, which is just crazy. That's what they're doing on purpose, because it puts us against each other rather than just say, oh, I'm sure Jaron has reasons for believing in part of it, or he has reasons for not believing it at all, or whatever it might be. I think sometimes we just jump to quick conclusions, and that's why we have all these issues with little cliques in flat earth or whatever, because the same issue is that rather than just come together with things that we all agree on and then work towards the truth and the things that we may disagree on. People just jump on teams because so-and-so believes in this or so-and-so believes in Pac-Man.
Yeah, absolutely true. So here's something that's interesting for all you smokers out there. You know, get yourself a small pyramid and put it in there and let those cigarettes cook in that pyramid for a little bit. And they say that tobacco loses its harshness, and the most dramatic effect occur in pipe tobacco, unfiltered cigarettes, and cigars. But basically, they say that, you know, there are people that after having their packs of cigarettes treated inside of the pyramid, that they can no longer smoke the normal cigarettes without putting them in a pyramid first, which is kind of interesting. Now, I don't smoke, but Cami does. So I'm sure we'll be trying that. And, you know, just something out there. There's something for everybody to try in this. That's one of the things I think is so cool about it. And honestly, you could build a pyramid for pennies. Especially something to put your cigarettes inside of, or one of the other thing, and maybe I already covered this, but you know how we all use refrigerators to, you know, keep our food fresh. One of the other amazing things that they discovered is that food that is stored in the pyramid will not go bad anywhere near as fast. So it really slows down that spoiling or putrefaction that happens, you know, to food. Which I thought was pretty interesting. So I can just see these people. Oh, and in fact, there was one company that sold milk, and I think it's over in the UK, and they may still be doing this, but they literally would package their milk in pyramid-shaped cartons. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And they said that basically there was no need for refrigeration. It kept it perfectly fresh. It's like, wow. So,
you know, it seems like there's something to this, and obviously, you know, if there's something that is natural and beneficial, then, you know, the powers that ought not be are going to try to cover it up and make people think it's stupid, which is exactly, I know for a fact that you know, I've heard of this pyramid power book before in the past, and it was always sort of in a mainstream media treated as, you know, tinfoil hattery, right? That's how it's going to be treated, because if there is something to this, which I think there is, then the only thing that they have really, and it works very well on the mainstream media outlets, is to ridicule it and to use that good old herd mentality thing where, you know, people don't want to be, you know, the black sheep or whatever. And so they'll just say, oh, the pyramid power is stupid. That's what the TV said. Yeah.
And this is a really interesting little photograph here. Because they were making these devices to amplify the effects of pyramids, and they took a picture of it using these Kirlian techniques. And look what's coming. I mean, look at these little beams of energy coming off the top of the pyramids. Astounding, right? So what is going on there? Again, anyway. So yeah, that's the reason why I really thought that this was important. You know, it may or may not have anything to do with flat Earth, but because of the fact that it is such a prevalent structure on the plane, that there, in my opinion, and this is my opinion, there's something to it, because I simply can't, you know, buy into the idea that there are tens of thousands of these things all over the world, and they were just there for, you know, Martha Stewart decoration. It's just, I'm not buying that. There is something to them, and you know, I would like to get to the bottom of what it is. And like I said, this is a great thing that people can research a lot on themselves. So that's why I wanted to cover it today. And I will bring it up as kind of a side note in future episodes of Globebusters, you know, as I learn more and more about them. And I would say that this is something that everybody can do. And we're certainly going to be buying and building some of these small pyramid apparatuses and trying some of this stuff ourselves. And we're going to be doing it in a very scientific way, trying to set aside control groups, you know, kind of like what you're doing with your rice experiment. And by the way, how is that going, Jaron? I'm just curious.
It's still going. I mean, you can clearly see that there's a marked difference in the love rice versus the hate, but there's no mold yet. So I guess it's just going to take more time. I probably, if I had to do it all over again, would have done it differently. Maybe left the tops off or something to that effect. It kind of ruins the experiment a little bit, but certainly I don't even know how long it's been now. It's been probably 2 months. But there's no mold growing. It's just the love rice looks like you would still eat it. And then the neutral rice is kind of in between. And then the hate rice is a watery oatmeal looking mess.
Interesting.
I think I know what you did.
What?
Go ahead.
You did sort of like what with the ice crystals, but with rice, like cooked rice?
Yeah, we did it with cooked rice.
Okay, gotcha. All right.
I didn't think
That
you were
was the
supposed
first
to
I'd
cook
heard
it,
of it.
Huh?
I didn't think you were supposed to cook it, though.
Yeah, and that's what I've had some people say that, but I've also had some people say it you can. And yeah, we probably did it wrong. Maybe we'll do it again with uncooked rice. But then do you close it off? Do you seal it? Or do you leave it open?
I don't know. I suppose it really, those factors really wouldn't be as important.
Yeah, as long as it's
the
consistent.
primary.
Yeah, as long as it's consistent, right? As long as you're doing the same thing to all three.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. As long as your controls are getting the same treatment, essentially, aside from the hate and the love and the intention that you're directing towards the experiment, subjects themselves.
What would you say? Would it ruin the experiment at this point, or to say open each one for 5 seconds and then close it? Because maybe it might not be getting the mold because it hasn't had any contact with air.
No, there should have been air inside of it, but I don't know. It's hard to say. But whatever you do, like I said, just make it consistent. If you're going to open one, open them all.
Mm-hmm.
Open them all for the same amount of time, and just try and treat them as evenly as possible. So
yeah, I think we might redo it again because it clearly already has answered the question that I wanted. I mean, we'll do something new with. I know Dwayne was talking about doing the experiment he's going to do is to take a plant and plant 3 seeds. And then yell at one, and then keep one in the middle, and then have one that he talks good to, just to see how quickly the plant grows differently, which I thought was a good idea.
Yeah, well, I know several people that talk to their plants, and apparently there is a marked difference in the plants that they talk kindly to, and the plants that are talked kindly to, and love is intended towards them. There is a huge difference in the way they flourish, versus again, other plants that are not.
Yeah, if we handed these 3 jars to anyone in the world and said you can only eat one, there's 100% chance everyone would pick the love rice.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. No, I know studies were done where they would play classical music to a group of plants and no music to another group, and then like hard, heavy rock and roll or whatever to a third group, and of course the group of plants that were played classical music to grew a lot more healthy and stronger and everything. So yeah, there's definitely something to that.
Yep. All right. Well, cool. So anyway, that's my presentation for today on the pyramid power. And like I said, I will be setting up, in addition to posting all these links after the show, I will be setting up a share off my Google Drive so that you can download the material that I do have. And if somebody can find a PDF version of Pyramid Power and Pyramid Power, there is a second edition. That's a much smaller edition. That would be great if you could make that available also. That way people don't have to buy it, even though it's not that expensive. But it's just something, it's very simple and interesting reading. Now, I will say towards the end of the main Pyramid Power book, Dr. Flanagan goes technical. I mean, he goes really technical. So some of you may enjoy that. Other people would just be sitting there going, WTF. But I appreciate stuff like that because those people that are more technical minded, that really want to understand more the nuts and bolts of it, can go there. But just the superficial information provided on it, on face value is interesting. Like, some of the effects that I described earlier in the show. So by all means, do your research on it. Let us know how it goes, what you find out. If you have some very interesting stuff, we may even have you on and talk about it. It would be great if you could get any sort of video evidence of it. I'll definitely be videotaping stuff like this. Spies Like Us, I believe earlier in the chat said, put your Ferrocell device on a pyramid and see if you can get any results out of that. And yeah, I mean, these are great ideas. I never thought about that. That's a great idea. Oh, look, somebody found Flanagan's book, Pyramid Power Spunkin's PDF. Anyway, okay, well, anyway, so apparently it is out there somewhere. I was just watching the chat. And so all this information will definitely be available for everybody.